Welcome to the expert level greenhouse. This is my hybrid passive solar greenhouse. So the reason I call it a hybrid passive solar is that it's not totally passive. I use electricity, but we're off grid here, so I use very little. But this is sort of your ultimate greenhouse as far as season extension. I can get 4 seasons in here with very little inputs. This is a lot more of an expensive greenhouse, and it has some really interesting features that we'll get into, we'll talk about on the outside. So it's essentially a geothermal greenhouse, and when we go inside, I'll explain more of what that actually looks like. Our walls are almost an R40. They're somewhere between an R35 to R40. Kind of depends on how you measure things exactly, but I'll break that down later when we talk about the specific construction process of this greenhouse. We've got a double layer poly, just like the last greenhouse, but it's fastened a lot different on this structure because this structure is built like a house, essentially. So we've got a blower between that. We're framed onto a secondary building. So this greenhouse is connected to a garage where I also have a workshop and an office. So it's also the main hub of our homestead. It's a very important structure here on the homestead. It's kind of at the center of the action. All of our off-grid power systems are in the garage on this, but we're not going to talk about the garage or my office in this video. We're just going to talk about the greenhouse, but it is framed onto another building, and that's important to understand. We are 42 feet long, we're 20 feet wide, and we're 28 feet tall in the center at the high point. We have rafters that are built with 2x12 LVLs that are spaced 4 feet apart, and there's 4-foot purlins on there as well. And we've also got some interesting flashings and roofing features on this greenhouse that are important. I want to mention the aspects of this greenhouse and sort of the terminology. So this wall here on a passive solar greenhouse is referred to as a knee wall. Though on this specific design, it's a lot higher than your knee, but it's called a knee wall. This up here is the face of the greenhouse. This is a rake wall. And then on the inside is the rear wall, and that rear wall is what's butted up against the garage, shop, office, whatnot. This greenhouse has a 6-foot deep climate battery with 2 layers of pipe. And when we go inside, we'll talk about that further. I have windows on all sides. These are Inotech tilt and turn windows. I have windows on all sides, but I have less windows on the west side so that in the summertime when the sun is setting in the west, it's actually cooler in there than it is outside, which is a really neat feature. And we have standard 2x6 framing with rock wool insulation, and then we have an outsulation, a layer of insulation on the outside of the structure as well, which is a 1.5-inch ICO, which is like sort of a glass. It's made of glass, but it's an R9. And then we've got some bridging in between with vapor barrier and whatnot, but total we get to almost an R40 wall. So some of the flashings we did on this were all really custom, and there's a square piece of flashing here that is a really brilliant one. We use the roofing we're using on the sides here is the same roofing we use on the garage, and it'll be the same on the house. It's called a standing seam or Prolock. It's from West Forms Metals, and it's a great product because the screws aren't exposed, and so it's really good for winters where you have a lot of freezing and thawing. But this piece of flashing up here is very crucial because it covers the channel lock, which is holding this poly, and keeps water and ice from getting into the channel lock. So that way it moves all the water off, and I don't have any water compromising the way that channel lock is attached to the structure, which is very important. On my last greenhouse, my last passive solar greenhouse in Kelowna, I didn't do a very good job of that, and it's something that will have to be addressed on it eventually. But this, the way we did this flashing, makes it so that water never gets on the inside of the channel lock. So before we go inside, to just point out a few things on the exterior. We still haven't painted this greenhouse, so we're going to paint it to the same color of our house, which is going to be sort of a dark gray with trims and stuff like that. But we're finished with hardy plank and 7/8 corrugated steel, which is a theme I'm using a lot of on the property. We use it on the other greenhouse as well. I've also built these small little overhang roofs where I've got some tool storage here. I've got my hose mounted there. We've got an 2-foot overhang with the roof, and the way we've laid this roof out was really important actually to how this greenhouse functions. And you can see, if you just come over here a little bit, you can see how the snow is building up. And it's great because this just falls there naturally and I don't have to do anything. So I don't have to shovel it away from the building or anything. And because we have a steel skirting that goes around the base, it keeps the building dry. So that was a very important feature. This is what I call the nose of the greenhouse. This sticks out above my knee wall. This comes out 1 foot. And so all of my water and precipitation drips down there. And I have drainage in around this building like you would any other home, but I might eventually put a rain gutter along there just so that I can control that water and potentially harvest it more later, because this structure does shed a lot of water. All right, so coming into the greenhouse, you can see it's quite a large space. Basically, this greenhouse is divided up into 3 areas. So 1/3 of the greenhouse in its length is dedicated to this area where I have concrete pavers down. It's kind of a work area. It's actually at the moment an area that my kids play in pretty much every day. My son's got his trucks everywhere. And, but it's where I'll do a lot of potting up in the spring, any work that needs to be done. So I got this kind of work lounge area, if you will, here. The other third is the growing area for field crops. So we've got 2-foot high raised beds, just like in the hothouse. I've got 4 of them. They're 4 feet wide by 12 feet long. And then I've got one that's underneath the deck. So that's my growing area there. I've also got another small raised bed here. And then I've got a nursery area above. In its current setup, this is kind of a lounging, we're kind of hanging out in here. We're not growing a lot of crops, though I do still have some tomatoes that are just hanging on. And this greenhouse is a lot warmer than outside. So keep in mind, there's no active heat in this greenhouse whatsoever. It's -4 Celsius outside, which is about 18 Fahrenheit, or it's about 20 Fahrenheit. And we come inside and it's 15 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's no heat. Right now the climate battery is running, and the climate battery in this greenhouse is a lot more, it's a lot bigger than the other one. But so we've got these areas in thirds: hangout work area, growing area, nursery area up on the deck. So I have movable shelves that I can move around, and my wife's got kind of furniture hanging around here. We had a party in here not too long ago. It's a space that we spend a lot of time in the winter, and I'm not growing a lot of crops, and so it just becomes kind of a play area, hangout area. I've even got a suntan zone up on the collar ties there, where there's that little blanket up there. Because in this greenhouse, there's 3 levels of temperatures, and it's quite significant. So right now it's 15 degrees down here. It's about 16, 17 degrees up on the deck, and up at the very top where the climate battery is right now at this very moment, it's 20 degrees Celsius. And so it's taking air that's 20 degrees Celsius and it's sucking it down and distributing it into this large array of piping underneath us, and it's coming out on the other corner at about 10 degrees Celsius. So it's dumping about 10 degrees Celsius of heat in the ground. On a sunny day, if it was really sunny right now, it would be about 30 degrees in here at this point. At the deck, it would be about 35, and it'd be about 40 up there. And it would be taking that heat and dumping about 20 degrees of it in the ground, and then that air comes up. So let me explain this climate battery better, because this one is quite advanced. So this foundation is the foundation of a house, essentially. There's a 2-foot footing on the bottom, and then there's a 10-inch foundation wall on top of that, and then there's 3 inches of rigid insulation on the outside, buried underground. That's covered in flashings and dimple board and things like that, and that's buried. And then it's filled up with compacted sand. But what's different about this one than the last one is that this climate battery has 2 layers of pipes. So with our air intake here, we come down from a 10-inch air duct to a 12-inch inline fan. It's an 880 CFM fan, blowing air down into a 12-inch SDR sewer pipe. And that's a manifold that goes all along the 16 feet on the inside of this foundation. The greenhouse is 20 feet outside to outside. On the inside of the foundation, it works out to be about 16 feet, and that's how long that SDR pipe is. And then there's another SDR pipe down there, 12 inches, and there's 2 layers of big O pipe in that. And so every 6 inches, there's a 4-inch hole on 2 layers. So when that SDR pipe was laying down on the ground, we drilled 4-inch holes, and the first row of pipes basically hugged the very bottom of the floor that we're standing on, which is about 6 feet of compacted sand. And we ran that all across a pipe every 6 inches. Then that got buried in sand and packed and layered. And we layered and packed with water and a gas-powered packer every 3 inches. And then we packed up about a few feet of sand, and then we did the next layer. And so the next layer of pipes came out, and those ones are really only maybe about 1.5 feet from where we are, but the other ones on the bottom are a lot deeper. So what this did was it gave a more of a distributed area to evenly disperse heat amongst the ground, warming it up faster. And it's quite amazing how much this climate battery can warm up quickly because of it. And I monitor it now because I monitor my temperature up there, I monitor the air that comes out of the climate battery, and I monitor the temperature in here. This greenhouse, I have 3 points of measure that I'm constantly monitoring and tracking the data on. But the climate battery is essentially, if you imagine it as a flywheel, and the bigger the climate battery, the heavier or larger the flywheel. And so the flywheel spins with momentum. And as the temperature cools or warms up, the flywheel speeds up or slows down. But that momentum carries you. So the really interesting thing about this greenhouse is on a warm day like we've had today, at least warm in here, is that this greenhouse will charge up this climate battery a few degrees. And that will carry for about up to 48 hours. And what it means is that at nighttime, if it gets really cold and the temperature in here drops, I'll keep the climate battery running. So the air that's coming out of the climate battery right now is 10 degrees Celsius. The air temperature in here can drop down. I think last night it went down, well, it didn't go down below 10 last night, but some nights when it's been minus 20 degrees Celsius outside, it's gone down to 2 degrees in here. So if I keep my climate battery running, that air temperature is steady. It's a steady 10 degrees. So it could be 30 degrees in here, Celsius, and the air coming out is 10 degrees. Maybe it might rise up to 13 or something at that point. But then if the air temperature drops and I keep the climate battery running, I can keep the ambient air temperature in here close to the ambient air temperature of the ground, that is the really cool feature about this climate battery. And so in a nutshell, that's how the climate battery works. Now, let me talk about some of the other features in here. So we have our rafters, which are LVLs, manufactured lumber, and these are very long rafters. They're 28 feet end to end. It's also 28 feet high here. So it's a very long span. And they're 4 feet apart, and I've got purlins every 4 feet there as well. And then we've also got these features called a collar tie. That's this piece of wood that connects the rafter to the structure of the main building. That just kind of ties it all together, but it also gives me the ability to hang things from it, which is very useful when you're gardening. When you want to verticalize things, I mean, I'm making swings for my kids and hammocks and things like that in here as well. But it just gives me a lot of options that I can basically verticalize anything in this greenhouse. Now, if we look up top, our climate battery runs almost to the very top of the greenhouse. And it starts with a 10-inch pipe, and then it couples down to an 8-inch pipe, and then it ends with a 6-inch pipe. And we built this in 10-foot, one of them we did 20-foot pieces, but we basically, we carried this up with ladders actually, and then got it onto some brackets, and then I'll talk about that more in the construction phase of this. But so our climate battery is taking the hottest air and sucking it down in the ground. In the summertime, the climate battery can't take enough heat. It's just too hot. So above the climate battery air ducts are the exhaust vents. And there's 6 of these vents, and they are 16 inches wide, and they're 6 feet long. And we built them out of ICO insulation with steel flashing, basically. And we built these vents. And the vents also have those automated vents that we saw in the hothouse that have a gas chamber that, with heat, they open. So those vents, in the summertime, they pretty much are just open all the time. And all I have to do to vent this greenhouse almost instantly is let those vents open and then come in here and just open these windows like this. And I'll just go and I'll open all the windows. And I mean, really in the summer, they're just staying open all the time. But in the spring and the fall is where you're going to fluctuate, where, you know, you want it all sealed up at night, but then you want it vented by at least 9 or 10 a.m. because it gets too hot. So those exhaust vents are unbelievable. How quickly air just moves out of here. And I leave the climate battery running for a good chunk of the summer. It's probably turned off by late June because it's just, you can only dump so much heat in the ground. So it probably stays off until early September, and then I'll turn it back on in September and start charging this ground up going into the winter. It's kind of getting the momentum of the flywheel going into the winter so that as I go into November, I'm still holding heat from the summer in here. And it's amazing how much that'll carry you into the winter. And it just didn't get cold in here for long at all. So that is some of the features there. You'll notice that on the walls here, I've got this plasticky looking stuff. This is called an FRP. It's a fiberglass reinforced plastic. This is something you see in commercial kitchens and places like that. And we have the edges all done with it. The ledges on the windows are all finished with it. The idea with it is that because this is such a high humid environment, it's often, I mean, right now the humidity is 63% in here. I've actually been running a dehumidifier in here now because it's been up to 80%, which is nice when it's warm, but it really sucks when it's cold because then your temperature just feels that much colder, and that's why my tomatoes are starting to look a little haggard. But we are mid-December, so you know, I don't really care if my tomatoes survive much more at this point. I feel like I've got my value out of them. But we've got these FRPs on the walls and up here. It was quite a bit of work to do all this, but it basically just keeps this structure drier. It keeps the water out of the walls. All right, so just going on a little bit more about the features of this greenhouse. Again, knee wall, face, rake walls, and the rear wall. The rear wall is butted up against my garage. So right through here, I have my workshop. Behind there is my single car garage for my car. And then over there, I've got my office. And this deck is how I get to all of it. This wall is really important, and we had to do some interesting things with it. And what we did was we treated it like, almost like the exterior. So we did vapor barrier on this side. When we framed this, we did vapor barrier on this side, and we actually did Tyvek on the other side of that insulated wall. And the idea there is that because there's a wood stove in the garage, eventually I'll have forced air hydronics in here. but I don't have it yet. We have that Tyvek so that with that stove warms up, it will kind of dry out the other side and all the humidity stays in here. And so that was something that we felt was the right thing to do. We also have a thermal mass wall. So this is all a concrete. This is about 6 feet high off the ground down there, which is also thermal mass. And in the wintertime, the sunlight actually penetrates that wall and touches that wall. So it's another element of thermal mass on top of the climate battery. Now, just wrapping up some thoughts on the deck. The deck on this is really crucial. It allows me to verticalize. Because I have so much high area in this greenhouse, I want to maximize the square footage of area that I can use. That's why I have my grow beds down below, and the deck is the nursery area. But it's also at least a few degrees warmer up there than it is down here, so it makes it better for our nursery. And I also use these wire shelves to put my nursery flats on that even gets higher, and I get a warmer area. And I actually get more light because I'm above everything else. I get more light all the way around. And that's what's probably one of the most important features of a greenhouse like this, and why they call them a passive solar greenhouse, is that the face and knee wall is orientated straight to the south. So in the wintertime, the sun rises and sets within the scope of the face of the greenhouse, meaning that I get light coming in all the time in the winter from morning till night. In the summertime, not so much, because in the summertime, the sun is rising in the northeast and it's setting in the northwest. And so it's actually a good thing, because it means that this greenhouse is cooler than, say, that high tunnel out there in the summer, because it actually gets a little bit less light. Still gets all the light it needs to grow a crop successfully, but you get a break from the heat. That's why this wall here, the windows are arranged a bit different, and there's kind of more square footage of windows down here than there is on this wall. And on the western wall here on the corner, I have no windows, because when my sun sets down over here, I don't want it coming in the greenhouse. It gets too hot. And so because this wall here, there's no windows right here, and this is where the sun sets in the west about 4 o'clock, which is the hottest time of the day in the summer. This is all in shade. So the sun's over here. This whole thing casts shade in here, and this greenhouse is mostly in shade at the hottest time of the day. That's a very important feature. So let's talk about the performance of this greenhouse. Because I can essentially keep this greenhouse warm year-round. Once I have my forced air units with hydronics, which the lines are right there, it'll all be piped in soon enough, I'll be able to keep it warm effortlessly year-round. But it's not necessarily needed to keep this greenhouse. I don't need to keep this at 18 degrees Celsius at nighttime. If I was doing commercial production, there would be a reason for that. But I'm not doing commercial production, so I don't need that. I can let this greenhouse cool down. I'll let it get down to 5 degrees Celsius. I don't like it to get much below that, but I can let it get there. And I've got lemongrass in here still. I got tomatoes in here. I got cucumbers, and they're alive. But because it never gets cold in here, my soil is always going to stay at a certain level of warmth. And I could essentially seed anything any time of the year and grow stuff. I could start seeding lettuce if I wanted to right now, though it's not really advisable to seed before the winter solstice. It's better to seed after. But I could seed anything any time of the year. And so that's great. And that's worth a lot to some degree. But is it worth what this greenhouse is actually worth? It's debatable. I'll let you decide. But this greenhouse costs somewhere between $50,000 to $80,000. I don't know the exact cost, and it's a bit nebulous, because what do I count on the other side? Because it's framed to the garage and greenhouse, so it's a little bit tricky to split the costs. And so I say it's somewhere between $50,000 to $80,000. Now, that does get me the ability to grow year-round fairly effortlessly, but not that much different from the other greenhouse, which is about a fifth or an eighth of the cost. of this one. But what it does get me is I get a nursery in here. I get an area that I can hang out. I mean, I'm sprouting my chicken feed in here at the moment. My kids play in here. We hang out on the hammocks. I suntan up there. There's a huge element of lifestyle built into this, which is up for you to decide whether it's worth an extra $40,000 to $70,000. So it's hard to say. All right, so that's it for this greenhouse tour. So if you guys want a detailed, more in-depth version of this, head over to fromthefield.tv. If you're not a member, you can sign up for free for 7 days. If you just want to check it out, you can watch the whole series if you want. So we did a full-length video for each greenhouse, and the only thing that we added that you didn't see in this version is I went through the materials in more detail, and I covered the construction process from beginning to end of each greenhouse. So if you want to see that, head over to fromthefield.tv. If you guys like this video, smash the like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out my site, fromthefield.tv. It's where I post all my vlogs and the vast majority of all my content. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.